Hello and welcome back to our investor series on some of the greatest investors of all time. We've previously talked about Warren Buffett and we've talked about Peter Lynch. And today I'd like to share with you an investor who made it his business many years ago to clone the investment principles of Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch. I'm talking about a gentleman by the name of Mohnish Pabrai. Mohnish was born in India in 1964, and after he finished high school, he moved across to the United States and went to Clemson University. Upon graduating from Clemson, he actually worked in IT for a number of years for a few firms and then actually started his own IT business that he ultimately sold for multiple millions of dollars in the early 90s. And in fact, Mohnish tells a story of flying back from the UK on a visit to see some friends and family, and he was traveling back to the United States and he was simply waiting around in the airport for his flight. And he'd sold his business and had a few $1 million hanging around and thought, well, I'd like to learn how to invest it. So he found a couple of books written by Peter Lynch. And he read those books on the way back on the airplane. When he got back to the United States, he figured out that Peter Lynch didn't have that many books around. But during that process, Peter Lynch had mentioned the name Warren Buffett. To cut a long story short, Mohnish took it upon it himself in the mid-90s to research, and he couldn't figure out why, when he did some research, that there were not more investment managers inside investment banks and hedge funds and money managers around the world that were not cloning the principles of Warren Buffett. So what he did was he read everything he possibly could about Warren Buffett, and then he used $1 million of his own money and started to invest it in what he describes as using the Buffett principles. Within a few years, he turned that $1 million into somewhere between $8 to $10 million, and then decided that, well, perhaps with the success that I've had and giving a few stock tips for some friends, of course, they started to come to Mohnish and say, hey, Mohnish, will you look after our money for us? In fact, he had some friends of his that were working at Microsoft at the time come to him in the late 90s, around 1999, and ask whether or not he'd look after some of their own money. So he started what is today the Pabrai Investment Funds, his own investment opportunity for people to invest with Mohnish and earn a reasonable return on investment. In fact, over the course of the last 20 years, it's been an outstanding return on investment. In March 22, the latest records show that if you had have had $100,000 with Mohnish in the last 20 years, that $100,000 would have grown into about $970,000 versus having that money in an S&P 500 index fund that would have grown to roughly around $550,000. Mohnish became famous, you might say, amongst investors after he paid $650,000 in 2007 to have lunch with Warren Buffett. It was a charity lunch, and with one of his colleagues, Guy Spier, they chipped in some money together and they won that charity auction lunch to have lunch with Buffett. Since that point in time, Mohnish has offered to work for Warren for free. Warren politely declined. But essentially, Mohnish has been out there on YouTube, on social media, and I encourage you to subscribe to his YouTube channel also. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to this one. But essentially, Mohnish is sharing with retail investors the Buffett formula and the Buffett strategy to investing and how he has been able to build his own investment returns to be better than the average simply by using those principles over a long period of time. The fact that he had lunch with Buffett has opened up many doors, and he's now also very close friends with Charlie Munger. And today he's giving back 2% of his net wealth to charity. He started the Dakshina Foundation in India, where he helps underprivileged families put their kids through school and hopefully graduate and be able to get scholarships to the United States, as he was able to enjoy a college in the United States, Clemson, and graduate. But Mohnish Pabrai today manages in excess of over $500 million. In fact, it's most likely these days getting up close to $1 billion. And the principles that he used are very, very simple. Buy businesses that are undervalued. Buy businesses that in the next 3, 5, 10 years are going to be worth a lot more than what they are today. And when you're analyzing a company, ask the simple question of, is the business getting better? If the business is underpriced, if the business is getting better, and you can see the final destination of where that likely business is going to be in the next 3 to 5 years, then it's likely going to be a great investment. Mohnish has done it for the last 20 odd years. He's continuing to do it. And Mohnish Pabrai is a classic example of one of the greatest investors of our modern time, using the simple Buffett formula for enormous success. Until next time, happy investing.